So, today we're going to dive into a moment that was, well, a devastating turning point in Pakistan's history. We're talking about the imposition of martial law. And this wasn't just some change in government. It was a moment that literally rewired the entire political DNA of the nation.
Now, our analysis for this explainer comes straight from a really groundbreaking book, Quaid-e-Azam of Pakistan, which was written by Mr. Zaheer Ahmad Meer. He's a constitutional lawyer and an author, and his work offers this incredibly sharp defense of Pakistan's founding principles. So we're going to be digging into his key arguments. You know, the story of Pakistan's first martial law really starts with a huge question. How does a democracy, a country founded on such clear principles, completely lose its way? To even begin to find the answer, we have to go all the way back to the beginning.
See, before the crisis, there was the blueprint. And we absolutely have to understand the foundational ideas that Pakistan's founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, laid out. Because only then can we really grasp the sheer scale of what was eventually thrown away.
Jinnah's vision? It was crystal clear. He was unequivocal. Power has to have limits. He insisted that all institutions, and that includes the very powerful civil service, they had to be accountable. And here's the big one, the most crucial part. The military's role was to serve, to stay subordinate to civilian authority. For Jinnah, this was completely non-negotiable.
And his warnings about this? They were incredibly direct and sharp. He told the civil servants, quote, "Never forget that you are the servants of the people, not their masters." He said similar things to politicians, telling them not to just grab powers that didn't belong to them. But after he passed away, these warnings weren't just ignored, they were actively flipped on their head.
So how did this super strong foundation even begin to crumble? Well, the decade after Jinnah's death was just marked by this slow, steady erosion of his principles. And that created a massive power vacuum that someone, or something, was just bound to fill. Right after Jinnah's death, the political landscape just fractured. The country saw this revolving door of ministries, one after another. Political parties completely lost their discipline, and governance was basically paralyzed by constant infighting, conspiracies, and just these vicious power struggles. The system, to put it mildly, was failing.
As the author Zaheer Ahmad Meer puts it so perfectly, when politicians stop governing, someone else will govern in their place. And this failure created a vacuum, a void, that was not going to stay empty for long. Someone else was waiting, watching, as all this chaos got deeper and deeper.
And that someone else, it wasn't another political party. As the civilian leadership just fell into total disarray, a new center of power started to emerge from the shadows. And it was formed by two of the state's most powerful, non-elected institutions.
What you had was this really stark contrast. On one side, you've got senior bureaucrats and military generals, and they're all united by their total frustration with the political chaos. They wanted order, and they really believed they could be the ones to fix Pakistan. And on the other side, a political class totally consumed by infighting and just plain weak leadership. This created the absolute perfect storm for an alliance of the unelected.
You can almost see the path to intervention happening in 3 clear steps. First, the political leadership just collapses. Second, the bureaucracy and the military get deeply, deeply frustrated with the paralysis. And third, they form what the author calls a quiet alliance, setting the stage for everything that was about to happen.
This alliance, well, it ultimately led the nation to a point of no return. And look, this wasn't some overnight coup. It was the final, tragic step in a decade-long process of political decay, and it ended in the ultimate violation of Jinnah's entire vision. The author captures this dynamic with such a powerful metaphor. The bureaucracy opened the door, the military walked through it. Think about that. By completely losing faith in the democratic process, the civil service created the opportunity. They didn't seize power themselves, but they basically unlocked the door and held it wide open for the military to walk right through and impose martial law.
So all of this leaves us with a final, really tough question. Was Pakistan's democratic path simply lost in all the chaos and the incompetence of its political leaders? Or was it actively betrayed by unelected institutions that stepped way, way beyond their constitutional boundaries? The evidence that Meer lays out in his work really forces us to think hard about this critical turning point, a moment that, believe me, continues to echo through the nation's history.
So what we're looking at here isn't just a title. It's really the core conflict of a nation's story. On one side, you have the founder's dream for a state built on laws and principles, and on the other, the harsh reality of its collapse. Today, we're going to dig into how one led to the other. pulling from the analysis in Zaheer Ahmad Meer's book, Quaid-e-Azam of Pakistan. Just think about that for a second. Every country, when it starts out, kind of has a map, right? A vision, a path laid out by its founders. But what happens when that map gets ignored? When it's just folded up and tucked away in a drawer? That question? Well, that's at the very heart of what we're talking about today. And this is the moment the map was literally torn up. October 1958. The Constitution was abrogated. Now, that's a legal term, but it basically means it was completely thrown out, canceled, made void. This wasn't just some political shuffle. It was a seismic event that knocked the entire country off its intended course. So what did that actually look like on the ground? Well, the effects were immediate and they were total. It was like someone just hit the freeze button on the entire democratic system. Let's break down exactly what went down. First thing to go, the people's choice. The government that had been elected, from the very top all the way down, was just sent packing. The leaders who were supposed to be accountable to the public were, just like that, gone. And then, silence. All political activity just came to a grinding halt. The debates, the parties, the rallies, the organizing, all of it just stopped. The very engine that drives a democracy was completely frozen over. And finally, the rights of ordinary citizens were suspended. You know, the basic freedoms that are supposed to be the bedrock of a constitutional state, they just vanished almost overnight. This was a complete systemic shutdown. Now, this quote gets to a really crucial point from Zaheer Ahmad Meer's analysis. He argues that this wasn't some bolt from the blue. It wasn't a sudden storm. Instead, it was the result of a slow 10-year drift, a gradual abandonment of the nation's founding principles, fueled by political infighting and a failure to really lock in the framework Jinnah had imagined. Okay, so if the nation was drifting, what was it drifting away from? To really get the scale of what happened, we have to go back to the original map, the one drawn up by Pakistan's founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And here they are. This was his vision, and it wasn't vague at all. It was built on these clear core values. First, civilian supremacy, meaning the elected representatives of the people are in charge, period. Second, constitutional rule. The law is king, and it's above everyone. Then you've got democratic dignity, accountability, equality before law, and this commitment to moral leadership. These were the absolute non-negotiables. And maybe the most critical point of them all was this one. Jinnah could not have been more clear about the role of the military. It was there to serve the state, to protect it, all under the command of the elected government. It was never, ever meant to rule it. Its place was in the barracks, not in the capital. So when you put Jinnah's crystal clear vision right next to what happened in 1958, wow, the contrast is just jarring. As we're about to see, this wasn't just a disagreement over policy, this was a fundamental betrayal of the entire reason the nation was founded. This quote just cuts right to the heart of the tragedy. I mean, think about the irony for a second. Jinnah's entire life's work was a struggle against an unelected, unaccountable empire. He fought tooth and nail to create a state governed by its own people, under its own laws, and then that very principle was torn down from the inside. I mean, just look at this comparison. On one side, you have Jinnah's blueprint, rule of law, the dignity of a democratic process, and civilians in charge. On the other side, the reality of martial law, a tossed-out constitution, no basic rights, and power in the hands of people who were never elected. They're polar opposites. There's just no middle ground here at all. So, the takeaway here is absolutely crucial. The events of 1958 weren't just a political crisis. As the source material argues, it was a direct, profound betrayal of the Quaids of Jinnah's foundational legacy for Pakistan. And a decision like that, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum and then disappear. It casts a very, very long shadow. That moment in 1958 set off a chain reaction, creating long-term problems that have echoed through Pakistan's history ever since. You can almost see it like a set of dominoes falling. First, the idea of breaking the Constitution becomes, well, normal. It's an option on the table. That, of course, weakens all the democratic structures. Then, other institutions get dragged into politics and compromised. An authoritarian culture starts to grow, and eventually, people just lose faith in the Constitution itself. It becomes this destructive, vicious cycle. And this quote from Meer explains exactly why that first derailment was so damaging. It created a precedent. Once you cross that line, it just becomes easier and easier to cross it again and again. What was once an exception starts to feel like the rule, and this habit of derailing democracy becomes a recurring nightmare in the political landscape. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It really brings us right back to our original idea of the map. The lesson is all about understanding the consequences of veering so far off that original path. And honestly, the whole story can be boiled down to this one powerful contrast. The path Jinnah laid out was for a disciplined democracy, but by abandoning that map, the nation found itself stuck on a completely different road, one marked by a repeating cycle of political instability. And that leaves us with the final and most critical question. When a nation has strayed so far from its original path for so long, how does it rediscover that map? How does it even begin to recalibrate its compass and start the long journey back toward that founder's original vision? That's the challenge that this history leaves all of us to